From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here on, yes, it is a Tuesday. Hope if you had yesterday off, you had a safe holiday weekend. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Day yesterday. And of course, we had the snow and the severe weather from last week. And boy, it was wet and it was a bit snowy and slick, but really, I don't know about wherever you happen to live. If you just stayed in or drove slowly, it wasn't a big deal, frankly. You know, we made it through. I know some areas got more than others. I certainly hope you were safe for wherever you were at. Still a little chilly out there, but we're back at it live this morning, and we've got a good show on tap for you. We're streaming live, or we hope to be in a few moments here on Facebook as well, if you want to join us there at newschannel5.com. But here on the Plus this morning, we'll get the number up on the screen. The question, you know, we have our elder care attorneys come on sometimes, and they've certainly helped me through this, and they deal with the legal aspect of it. But there are so many of us in this day and age now who are tasked with caring for someone. And I'm not talking about parents and their children, though that could fit that category depending on the circumstance. But I'm talking about an individual who perhaps who has developed special needs, or someone who has an illness, or someone who is suffering from dementia, like an elderly parent. And in a lot of cases, these people are cared for by family members. And sometimes it's because that's what you would prefer to do. Sometimes it's because even if they're really suffering from a condition beyond what you think you can handle, you have no other choice because there's no one else. And you're not going to turn your back on your parent who is suffering. You're going to do the very best you can. But we focus a lot of times on the caring of those individuals. What we too often forget about is the folks providing that care need some support and help as well. Are you one of those people, maybe caring, or do you know someone who has a loved one that's suffering from Alzheimer's, and it's pretty much her job 24/7 to watch for this individual and care for them on all different levels? That is more than a full-time job. I mean, it is exhausting, it can be expensive, and it leaves little time for other things to do. So the important thing to remember is there's a lot of help available on that front for the caregivers. That's what we're talking about today. Not the people that need the help necessarily, that are ill or suffering from a condition like Alzheimer's. We're talking about the caregivers who are, you know, caring for their loved ones or friends or whoever that may be. We're going to talk this morning with Mental Health America of Middle Tennessee, or Mid South Tennessee. Lynn Wood is joining us now on Zoom. She's the Caregiver Support Coordinator. I think you can probably do a better job than I just did explaining that, but we know, Lynn, there are caregivers out there that are overwhelmed, right? Absolutely overwhelmed,
right,
trying to take care of a loved one or a friend because they want to. It's the right thing to do, and sometimes they have no other choice. They don't have the means to bring in a home health care nurse to assist them. How great a problem is this for folks in terms of how many people are doing this, caring, and probably are overwhelmed?
Well, I mean, the number is astronomical when you're thinking that there's 6 million people with diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. 1 in 8 people, if you're in the grocery store, count out 1 in 8 is dealing with a loved one or family member that is living with some type of dementia symptoms or Alzheimer's. So it is out there. What we have to do as a caregiver support coordinator is we have to talk about it. And there are a lot of resources, but a lot of times folks don't know how to access them. So that's where I come in as a caregiver support coordinator. It's listening to what they're needing and then getting them to the right place to find that care. And if someone is an in-home caregiver to a family member, how can they do the job easier, and it not hopefully not be something that's escalated with a conversation about what to have for dinner, but there is a smoother way. There's a slide I use when you're caring with someone with dementia or Alzheimer's. It could be a dance like a tango, or it can become a knot like a tangle, and it really all depends on the care provider's approach and making sure they're taking care of themselves. And that's my job. My job is to strictly just take care of the caregiver.
The scenario you just described, I have a sister-in-law whose husband recently did pass, but for a period of 2 to 3 years, she was the primary caregiver for him as he, suffered from dementia and vascular disease. And it was overwhelming. I mean, she was pretty much by herself. Of course, she had an extended family that assisted, but most of the time she was there one-on-one. And she didn't have any special training on how to deal with Alzheimer's patients, but it was to the point where she had to watch him. If she didn't, he could walk out and just disappear. We have those silver alerts all the time. There were times, he was a larger man, where they get confused or irritated. He could easily have injured her, knocked her down in a fit of anger. And she's by herself there. She made it and did well enough, but it exhausted her. Absolutely exhausted her. It got to the point where we were worrying more about her, frankly, than him, because he was pretty much far gone. His brain wasn't there anymore. I was worried about her.
Right. And it's a valid concern, because more than half of the time, I think the figure is something like 67 to 70% of the time, something does happen to the care provider, the caregiver. And so now someone has to step in and take care of two people.
Yeah.
So my job then is also not only teach a family or a care provider how the communication do's and don'ts and redirection techniques. My job is also helping them plan for the what ifs and putting those plans in place. So if something does happen to the one who has the dementia diagnosis, if something does happen to the caregiver, somebody can step in and not wreck that person living with the disease's routine, because that is going to be horrific if their routine is not maintained. And so I do care for the caregiver, and there's not a lot of me's out here. Lots of folks want to fix the dementia or the Alzheimer's, but a lot of times someone gets the diagnosis and the doctor says, okay, I'll see you back in 6 weeks. And that loved one is sitting there going, okay, now what?
Right.
Well, I can be the now what. I have those materials and those resources. We're nonprofit, so my services are free. And that's all I want to do is just help you navigate this journey that you're on.
I think that's great, because it's a difficult situation for folks, especially sometimes you may have loved ones, as was in my situation, my parents, who lived alone, but they lived across the country, and my brother and I lived in other states. And it took us a while. In retrospect, we should have taken action probably a good year or year and a half before we did. Thankfully, nothing bad happened to my folks. But I mean, their neighbors and friends started noticing problems, and we were absent. We tried to see them. And boy, I'll tell you what, they can put up a heck of a front.
Yes, they can.
You know what I'm talking about? Describe to people what I'm talking about there. On the phone, I thought mom and dad were peachy. Off the phone in their daily lives, they were a disaster. And unless I was there to see it, I didn't know it.
Well, because the chit-chatting part of our conversation, our songs, our prayer, our poetry, and that chit-chatting, how you doing? I'm doing great. Everything fine. Yes, it is. That's all on the right side of our brain, and that doesn't deteriorate as fast. And so when you're talking to someone over the phone, you can kind of fake it. Also, because you're on the phone, you're not having to deal with multiple senses, meaning taking in visual data and auditory data. When we have an Alzheimer's diagnosis or even different types of dementia, it becomes harder to have both of those senses.
Describe to people what I'm talking about. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Off the phone in your daily lives.
It's hard to take in both audio and visual and differentiate. So my mother has some speech issues. She's so much better at communicating over the phone. It can be that chit-chatty, and they do fake it. And then that's why one of the things, I have a piece that is, if you're going to go visit your parents, in the summer or whatever, what should you look for? So that you can get a real understanding as to what's happening. And so I'm not surprised to hear that, because They can fake it.
They can. Listen, we're going to take a break, and I want to remind folks we are up and running on Facebook. If you'd like to join in the conversation, you can message. I've got it here, and I'll monitor if there are questions from anyone there. And you can also call in 737-7587. But Lynn Wood, when we come back, we're going to talk about how you can go about seeking these services. A lot of folks are left to care for their loved ones because they have no other option. And sometimes it comes down to a matter of resources. They don't have the means to bring in a home health care nurse or someone to come sit perhaps with their loved one for a portion of a day while they go out and do some important shopping. It's basic things like this. And as she just said, I guarantee you there's a bunch of people watching right now on the Plus or on Facebook that if they're not dealing with a very situation kind of along these lines, they know someone that it is. It's just the way it is these days. And Lynn's going to have some suggestions, not just on signals and how you can pick up when you really need this help, but what help is there and how to get it. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us.